Juliane von Reppert Bismarck is an award-winning journalist who has written for the Wall Street Journal, Reuters, Newsweek, and Spiegel Online, and others for the past 2 decades. She is the founder and director of Lie-Detectors, a non-profit organization that sends professional journalists into schools in Europe to foster awareness among children and their teachers of disinformation and news bias.
Okay, hi everybody. I am going to have a fairly limited PowerPoint presentation, and that's because when we go into classrooms, most of the time something malfunctions, so we can't actually rely on it, but I'll give you a couple. So as we've been talking about all of these amazing projects the last few days, and I've been collecting a ton of cards from a lot of you, and I hope that by the end of what I've said, you will have, you'll have kind of incentive to talk to me about it, because I hope we can do lots of really great work together. So many amazing projects out here. So, as Nancy said, I'll talk a little bit about why we do what we do, and then I'll tell you what we do. So as Nancy said, I'm a journalist, and I was minding my own business, doing journalism, talking about doing an amazing documentary about a year ago about the rise of xenophobia in Europe. And the idea was that we were going to have this beautiful documentary shown in all sorts of festivals, raise awareness and make the world a better place. And then Trump won the elections, and a few of us, and me in particular, thought to ourselves, what's the point? What are we doing? What's the point of doing this fantastic, beautiful journalism if people can't tell the difference between beautiful journalism and complete and utter fiction? So, and it's not just that, it's not just the fact that there is fake stuff out there. We've talked a lot about fake news, disinformation. It's also that this is coupled with a really wholesale attack, and I don't think that we've talked about this very much here in the last few days. We did yesterday morning, but not in the breakout sessions. I think it's really important to know that there's actually a concerted attack on the credibility of the regular journalist industry, and we feel this very keenly. Some of that's our own fault. As journalists, we have experienced a real pressure on our business model. It's nothing new. A lot of you know about it. We talked about journalism yesterday. Facebook and Google are gobbling up our advertising revenues. We're under real pressure. We have fewer resources to cover an ever more complex world. And yes, we do make mistakes. We do. This morning we heard that we should be credible and truthful, but we have limited time, we're competing, and we are vulnerable ourselves as journalists to spin, to very sophisticated spin. So that's actually eroded a lot of trust, and that coupled with the actual attack on journalists is actually working. So there's a lot of polls out there, I don't know if you've seen them, on trust in the media. One of my favorite ones is an Ipsos Mori poll out of the UK, which asked people to say what professions they trusted most. And up at the top, wonderful, were nurses and doctors, followed very closely by teachers. And down at the bottom, ranked with real estate agents, were journalists. So that's how bad we are. And I can tell you from my own personal experience that in my own very social circle, I've had people say to me, why should I trust you? You are, after all, a journalist. And that's really quite dangerous, because we journalists are supposed to hold power to account, and we're supposed to inform citizens and voters. And really, if people can be made to stop trusting regular sources of information, they can be led to believe pretty much anything, and that's a real problem for democracy. So that's, in a nutshell, why we started Lie-Detectors, and what we do, it's something very, very simple. We select and train and send out working journalists who are working for established media into schools to give very short, interactive, pinprick sessions to classrooms with children aged 10 to 11, and 14 to 15. And what we try to do with that age group is get them, the bookend, these are bookends of when children enter the online world and start consuming stuff, and on the other side, start actually making up their own minds about the world and actually forming political opinions. And we don't, we're not trying to tell them what to do, we're trying to make them aware of various things. So the main two things we do, and by the way, this requires zero preparation by the teachers, because we're working on the assumption that not every country is wonderful, like Finland, like we heard about yesterday, or Sweden, where there's government mandates to actually have media literacy programs, media and information literacy programs. We're kind of working on the assumption that teachers are overworked. Not all countries are actually making a very big effort on this. And very often teachers are overwhelmed and intimidated by the very subject, and they don't want to start this conversation with children because they know that the kids probably know a lot more about this stuff than they do. So we work with no preparation for the teachers, no preparation for the children. In fact, it's supposed to be there's supposed to be an element of surprise, and very little preparation for the journalists, because they have very limited time as well. And we do two things. So first of all, we make them aware of whatever you want to call it, fake news, disinformation, We let them use their own words. We show it to them, and then we get them to kind of define it themselves. What do you call this? What is this called? What is this? And it's amazing. They actually have a vocabulary for this. It's not the same vocabulary that we use, but they get it. They get it completely. They get two things. They get two things. Oh, has this been going back and forth? Oh, anyway, sorry about that. They get it, they absolutely get it, because children understand YouTubers, so they understand that money can be made, and they understand online bullying. And those two things actually make up fake news, if you think about it. So they have this child's view of the world that translates perfectly onto the fake news world. The only thing that we need to do is actually shift their view onto it. So this is incredibly encouraging. And then we give them tools, and we kind of like make them aware, like how do you figure out why is it there, why does it matter, and what can you do about it? Here are the lists, here's a fact-checking list, blah, blah, whatever. Here are the fact-checking sites, here are online resources, and all of that stuff. We leave them with all of that. But the second part that we do, and I think this is probably more important, and it's more subtle, and it's why we use journalists, is that we are sending working journalists. We actually have the children have an interaction with a journalist who adheres quite strictly to a script, but can also talk from their own experience. And the thing that the journalists talk to them about is not so much of what wonderful journalism they do, which, believe me, journalists love to talk about that stuff. But actually, it's not so much about what journalists are doing right, because that's really our fundamental instinct as journalists, finding this awful world of misinformation. We want to say, well, they're wrong and we're right. And, those are not facts. These are the facts. Come to our fact-checking sites. Here they are. That's all very, very important. But the thing is that we're not really trying to say they're wrong, we're right. That's rhetoric. We are reason. Reject rhetoric. Come to reason. We actually go there and we make them understand that actually we do sometimes make mistakes. We do sometimes get it wrong. We do work under very, very serious time constraints. And we do games, we do interactive games, especially with the younger kids, so that they physically incorporate and internalize the experience of how a one-sided story is made, or an incomplete story is made. And they really do get that. And they understand at the end of it, that's the whole point, that there are lies on the one side, and then there is an incomplete truth on the other, that they have to work a little bit harder. They become, not even children want to be duped. We adults don't like being duped, neither do children. We make them aware that they have to perhaps work a little bit harder, and very specifically, that it is in their power to decide how much influence fake news, I'm just going to call it fake news, I know it's called lots of different things, disinformation, whatever, how much influence this has, because it depends on how they interact with it. And the effect has been really electrifying. The kids love it. They love it that a journalist comes into the classroom, and we're trying to close the gap a little bit between journalists who are very often, I think it's Steve Bannon who called journalists the globalist, corporatist, mainstream media, and Trump calls us the fake news media. And that's really because journalists, that's going back a little bit to the business model. There's fewer of us in the world. This is particularly evident in the United States, where the heartland of America has been hollowed out of regional newspapers, and very few people have contact with journalists. Anyway, so we try to establish, even for a little moment, a contact between tomorrow's voters and a journalist, and then they realize that we're actually human beings. And the kids love it. The journalists love it. Give them a moment to talk about themselves. Amazing. And the teachers like it as well. So I have a few, I hope. Do I? There we go. I have a few testimonials here where you'll see what people have to say about it. And the thing is, we can't transmit. These are really short pinprick sessions. We're working with journalists who are under time pressure, kids who've got full curricula, teachers who are not necessarily 100% engaged at the beginning, although 100% of our test sessions have found that teachers at the end of a session are more interested than at the beginning. And of course, in 45 to 60 minutes, which is the amount of time that we have, we can't transmit everything. There's so much material. You're all working with this material. There's so much to understand from so many different points of view. We cannot transmit that information at all. But what we can do is we can plant question marks into their little heads, into the heads of the children and the heads of the teachers. And once we've managed that, then all sorts of wonderful things can happen. One of my favorite feedback comments was from a teacher recently in Brussels, who said that as a result of the session, he had started to think differently about his own media literacy. And this is a really wonderful ethics teacher, really great guy. And he wrote to me, he said, "I have changed my news habits as I was aware that I was consuming only progressive and liberal media and not hearing the other voices out there. I now have a more balanced news approach." And I actually really just wanted to cry when I read that, because that's really what it's about. It's not about just who's right and who's wrong. We can't eradicate disinformation and manipulation. Those things are out there to stay. But we can strengthen the next generation to think critically, to think differently, to check their facts, to check what the other side has to say, and to engage in dialogue with people who might have read other things, might have read things from another side, who might have facts that might be just as right, but might have been presented with a different emphasis. So disinformation's not going away, so maybe we can get them to engage, we can get them to rediscover the wonderful messy center where you kind of talk to each other and figure out what's really right and what's really wrong, rather than retreating to your positions. And maybe with any luck, we can disarm the whole thing by getting the next generation to be able to laugh about the whole thing. So anyway, here's where we are. We've just some practical information. We have we've tested. We've been running a testing session. We've got wonderful funding. We've just been promised funding for the next 3 years. We've tested the sessions in Belgium and Germany. We translated the sessions into German. That works. The whole idea is that this should be a very, very simple thing to work in different countries and different cultures. So we've translated it from Belgium into Germany, into German classrooms with different journalists, and it works. So that's really encouraging. We're training up journalists, and we're expanding in Germany and Belgium, and then the plan is to go into other countries in Europe. So now we're working on partnerships, obviously with journalists who we need, who we're training up, and with local school authorities, and partnerships with the likes of you, I hope, so that we can refer teachers to the amazing tools that so many of you are developing. So if you're interested, oh, see, can't rely on this. There, if you're interested, there's my email address, or find the website and find us that way, and get in touch. Thank you very much.